Through the Well of Pirene by Ether Echoes. Chapter 1. The Forest Ways. And I saw, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer. Revelations, chapter 6, verse 2. Daphne. It had been the worst day of my life. There had been such high hopes for it, but come mid-afternoon, my plans had been soundly crushed. As I stared out the kitchen window at the falling red and gold leaves of a warm Massachusetts autumn carpeting the street, the confinement of the house closed in. My friends must even now be driving off to the mall, where they would have an absolutely fantastic time without me. "Did you hear me, young lady?" Father asked in what he clearly believed to be a tone of patient authority. It sounded more peevish and moody to me. I glanced over at him, but he hadn't bothered to look up from his paper. I chose to interpret the president's stern face glaring out from the front page at me as my father's own for the time being. "Yes, Dad." The paper crinkled in what must have been a spasm of irritation. "What did I say?" Listening to the television with most of my attention made my answer half-hearted. "You want me to do stuff with Amelia today?" "I don't just want you to do stuff, Daphne. Your mother and I want you to watch over her tonight." Any hope I had for tonight's plans with my friends shriveled up inside me. "For how long?" "All night." All remaining hope burst into flames, instantly turning to ash. Sucking in a breath through grit teeth, I calmed myself before putting on my best wheedling face. I turned towards the paper, opening my mouth to address my appeal to the President of the United States. "Don't bother. I can't see the puppy dog eyes." He sighed. The paper shuffling sounded a bit like a sigh, too, for that matter. "Look, it won't kill you to sit for your baby sister for one day." "But, Daddy, what if it does?" I tried anyway. You can't fault a girl for trying. "It'll make for interesting funeral conversation." "Dad!" I pivoted, crossing my arms. "I should at least get something if I'm going to be stuck here all day. Babysitter rates." "If I wanted to pay for a babysitter, I'd hire a babysitter. Half." "3/4." "Half," he said, with a note of finality. That suited me just fine. He had forgotten to negotiate what the original pay rate actually was, and when he was tired after a long day out with Mother, I'd be able to drive a harder bargain. Small comfort from missing the day with my friends. At least I'd have money for tomorrow. "Deal." I perked up with a bright smile. "Now, where is Amelia?" Almost as if on cue, I heard the front door slam. "Speak of the devil," Father said. Small feet pounded along the floor. I turned in time to catch a muddy bundle composed chiefly of a pair of pink sneakers, a messy blonde braid, and soiled clothing as it barreled into me at twice the speed of sound. I yelped at the impact and fell to the floor. "And she shall appear," Mother finished for him, her own blonde hair in disarray as she slumped in the doorframe leading to the porch. She rubbed eyes as green as mine and gazed into the distance. "Amy!" I growled from the floor, trying to fend her off. It was trying to push a friendly squid away, for she seemed to have 3 to 4 times as many arms as she ought to. "You little rat! You got my new jacket all muddy!" "You're a rat, and your jacket is dumb anyway. It barely covers anything." She beamed at me with a toothy grin. "We're gonna play today!" Snarling at her insult to my fashion sense, or trying to strangle her would only get me in trouble at this point, so I settled for grabbing her by the shoulders and holding her still while I stood up. "We are not," I said firmly, establishing my ground rules, or to be more accurate, my dominance, before it got any worse, "going to play today. You are going to sit, quietly, or play on your own, quietly, while I do something productive, like watch TV, or call up my friends." Amelia's face changed from beaming to hurt to cross to enraged, so quickly I could almost marvel at her changeling-like variability. It was like she had a superpower for gear-shifting emotions. "Daphne!" She stamped a muddy foot.
That's no fair! Mum promised we'd get to play today. Well, it's high time you learned that life isn't fair,
I answered a bit tartly, but I felt entitled to it.
Besides, Mum and Dad won't be here, so that means it's my rules.
You and I need to have a talk sometime, young lady, Father said. I could just make out the top of his black hair from behind the paper. Mother was more direct, going over to put her hands around her messy younger daughter. Now, Amelia, don't you throw a fit, or Mummy is going to be very cross, she said in a tone that brooked no argument. My sister stopped her complaint, pouting with cheeks full. Daphne? She lifted her gaze to me. Please, play with your sister.
But, Mum!
I didn't bother with the wheedling face. It never worked on her anyway. Just take her outside, go for a walk, she pleaded. Mother never really pleaded with her daughters, of course, but it wasn't a command yet.
Outside?
I grimaced, looking out at the warm autumn sky. It was so disgustingly wholesome and breezy. I might catch a lethal case of Ralph Waldo Emerson and start waxing poetically about fall colours and still forest pools if I went out there. You used to love going outdoors, Mother complained. All those nature walks as a girl, the trips with your cousins. I loved reading what you wrote about them. My mind flashed involuntarily to my bedroom, to a worn leather satchel in the closet. Buried within it was a girl's diary, which pulsed like the heart of a vile, nameless god. I shuddered.
That was then, Mum. I was like 5.
Father rustled his papers as he turned another page, chuckling. More like 8 or 9. You came home dirty as much as Amelia does. Whatever happened to that messy girl we had? Boys happened, Mother sighed. She took Amelia's backpack from around her shoulders and began to arrange the contents on the kitchen table with a mother's distracted efficiency. "Ugh!" I griped, throwing my hands up. "Ugh!" I added again, for good measure.
Fine, I'll do it, but only if it gets me out of this conversation.
Before they could thank me, or scold me, or whatever it was they were planning, I marched into the front room and exchanged my fashionable jacket for one that would keep off the weather when it turned cold tonight. I slipped off my platform shoes and put on a pair of sensible tennis shoes. Amelia materialized at my side with a small bag, a magnifying lens, and a book of local insects poking out of one end. "Bye, Mum. Bye, Dad," I called, pushing the door open. I pulled my cell phone off of its charger before stepping outside, hoping I would be able to find some coverage out in the park. "Bye, honey," Mother called, leaning out of the window as we walked by. I began pulling my hair into a ponytail while Amelia practically skipped along behind me. "Have fun!" "Yeah," I called back, peering up to see where we were going. Down the hill there was a short road and a stretch of town between us and a forest which had gone largely untouched by humans for over 1,000 years, protected from exploitation in the early 20th century, and nearly unused for millennia before settler and native habitation. Its canopy, bright with the colours of an autumn afternoon, whispered in the wind, as if trying to tell every passer-by that even in the days it had seen human hands, it had remained mysterious for reasons of its rough terrain and fickle weather. How I had loved that enclosed secrecy as a child, flights of fancy taking me to faraway lands filled with strange and colourful things. "Yeah, right," I muttered again and trudged on. The sign on the side of the trailhead was largely ignored, save for a quick glance. I had seen it often enough before to know what it said. Everfree State Park, Massachusetts State Parks and Forests. Clear water hummed and bubbled softly below the footbridge, flowing over the smooth stones of the stream bed to expose the darting shadows of fish. I massaged a sore ankle while lifting my phone up to the light dappling through a tree cover, hoping to catch a stray signal through the holes. No dice. The bars remained firmly buried. With a groan I shoved my phone back into my purse and hitched it up, scanning the nearby trees. Spotting a bright golden head against the carpet of leaves, I started towards Amelia, careful not to slip on the mud from last night's rain. Amelia's eyes were focused intently on the bush in front of her, the entomology book open on her crouched knees while she poked at the leaves with a stick in fascination. I expected more people to be out in a part of the woods so close to the town. The day was beautiful, too, but we were all alone. The holiday sales in town probably had something to do with it. People who weren't me were getting to hang out with their friends and get something done instead of heading out into the middle of nowhere. Evidently, my sister and I were the only ones who just had to enjoy nature today. Trying not to set my teeth too hard, I paused on an incline near her that had a view of an old gazebo, some park tables, and a long stairway up a hill that stood nearby. An old park bench lay invitingly within reach as well. Its worn surface was hard, yet inviting after the walk. I sat down and rubbed my ankles. The nearby hill caught my attention, and while considering the relative merits of a nap versus a hike up for a shot at better reception, I noticed Amelia had sprung up at my side. She held her hand up, and I recoiled at once when I saw the caterpillar nestled there. I made a face while the caterpillar lazily devoured the maple leaf it held, and ignored us both. Amelia only beamed harder.
Isn't it beautiful, Daph?
Of all the things in the world to have a childish fascination with, why did it have to be bugs? Even when I was her age, I had found them disgusting. They had too many legs, slimy skins, squirmy segments, and oozing ichor and soulless eyes and gross hairs and all the other horrible things bugs had. I had much preferred birds, and I could still pick out a few species among the trees around us. My amateur birding days had come to a right and proper end when I had put away my books and binoculars and other silly things. At the minimum, birds eat insects, which was a point for them in my book.
I don't care if it's going to turn into the most beautiful butterfly on the planet in an hour. You get that thing away from me now!
I growled, pulling my windbreaker's sleeves up over my hands to cover them and waving at my sister in an attempt to ward off the demon thing. Maybe the climb up the hill wouldn't be such a bad choice after all. Amelia's face fell. I knew I had disappointed her by yet again failing to enter into her world when invited. It wasn't like I was blind. I had been a kid once too, and had looked upon my older cousins with envy, and had wanted them to acknowledge me. Who seriously wants their baby sister tagging along with them everywhere, though? Didn't I have my own life to live?
Fine,
she huffed, bending down to deposit the caterpillar back on the bush. Not that the creature had cared. It had gone on pointedly ignoring both of us to continue concentrating on its meal. Amelia sprang back to her feet, once again flipping emotions like they were lines on a switchboard.
I know! We could go swimming!
It's the middle of autumn. We'd freeze.
Make snowmen!
I stared around with exaggerated patience before asking,
With what snow? Madmen, then.
No! Amelia bounced to my other side as I turned to walk off.
We could play catch!
I displayed my hands for her.
We didn't bring gloves or balls, Amy. Catch frogs?
No.
Climb trees?
No.
Ugh!
Amelia burst out in disgust, in a surprisingly good imitation of my outburst earlier today.
You never want to do anything, Daphne. You're so boring,
she shouted, stalking off towards the benches to sulk, her long golden braid lashing behind her like an angry tail. Starting towards the stairs leading up the hill, I turned and glowered at my sister, who was by then swinging on the worn, painted rails of the gazebo with a despondent air about her. She gave a big, dramatic sigh, probably because she knew I was looking. I brushed a few stray hairs out of my face and chewed on my lip for a moment. When my sister flopped unmoving on her back, I muttered under my breath. If she thought that pretending to be dead would get my attention, she was crazy. 10 minutes passed before I trod back, placing my hands in my pockets and making it appear as though I was there under protest.
Fine, Em. Have it your way. Let's play something.
I poked her limp body with a toe.
Yay!
Amelia cried and sprang up, revived from death at once by my concession.
Let's play a game then. Cowgirls and Indians, she suggested at once. That's terribly insensitive to Native Americans, Em. Space Invaders? Again with the games we can't play without tools?
I leaned against the gazebo's peeling frame while golden leaves swirled in the breeze around us. And no, I won't play it with my imagination, I added when she opened her mouth. Though I totally could.
Hide and seek? Bonnie and Clyde? Harold and Maud. Now you're just throwing names at me to see if
I paused, thinking back over what she had said. I snapped my eyes back down at her.
What was that one you just said? Harold and Maud?
No, the other one.
Bonnie and Clyde?
No! I snapped, my tone waspish. The one before that.
Oh!
She grinned.
Hide and seek. Do you want to play that?
My own answering grin might have scared her off if she hadn't been hoping for me to acknowledge her so badly. It was something of a Cheshire smile, toothy, wide, and mildly sadistic. There were beautiful possibilities in this game.
Yes, I do. In fact, I'll seek and you hide. All right.
She put her hands on her hips and looked me in the eye defiantly.
I'll bet anything you can't find me,
she declared. The poor, sweet, adorable thing. You're probably right.
I'll bet you a cookie you can't.
I'll bet you 10 cookies I can't.
Daph!
She rolled her eyes.
You're supposed to bet if you can. Well, whatever. Count to 100 and let me get started.
Okay, I said, with sweet poison in my tone. Turning to face the gazebo and setting myself, I glanced briefly to make sure she was running.
No peeking!
She glared at me until I covered my eyes with an arm.
All right,
I began, and started counting loudly, with a deliberate pace. 1, 2, 3. Listening to sneakered feet darting across the wood, and then over the leaf-strewn earth, I waited until I could no longer hear my sister running. 31, 32, 33, 34. I risked a glance, scanning the tree line slowly. 35, 36, I chanted, and started to creep away in the opposite direction from the one she had run. 37, 38, 39. I paused. Nothing. And 40 is good enough, I said, almost as giddy as she had been, and pumped a fist. Yes! Freedom! So I looked ridiculous, but it wasn't like anyone was around to spy on me. I had seen to that. Amelia would catch on eventually, of course, but for the next 2 to 3 hours I was as good as alone. With a new spring in my step, I started to make my way up the hill, with only a pair of thrushes dancing in the air nearby to keep me company. Warm afternoon sunlight greeted me as I began my ascent, the wind stirring my hair and the trees around me. Branches swayed and creaked, and the brush shifted with the passage of tiny animals. Without Amelia to distract me, there was nothing now between me and the natural setting I had let myself be lured into, and its rustic allure was trying to grab a hold of me once more. These woods might as well have been my backyard for how familiar they were, both here and in deeper parts where mother and father may not have been happy to know I had gone all on my own. It's why I didn't really feel as guilty as I should have about being so irresponsible and letting Amelia go unsupervised. After all, I turned out all right, didn't I? I had turned up at the door skinned, bruised, and covered in sweat and dirt more often than not. Trekking from hill to dale, fording streams, I would sometimes even scream my lungs out at the birds in the sky for the sheer joy of it. There, on top of that hill, I could almost see myself down by the river now. The old mossy log damming half of the stream below had been sturdier then, and I had walked on it every day to my adventures deeper in the woods, past the worn sign by the horse trail that pointed the way to Boston and the crumbling fence. Hard woods clustered along a rocky ridge in the west. It took little imagination to picture shapes lurking in the brush, darting from tree to tree. Fairies and goblins and overexcitable little girls' fancies danced at the edge of my mind, crowding to break back in. It seemed to me that I was forgetting something, and something very important to me at that. I didn't feel quite like looking at it, though, not directly, so I tried thinking about it obliquely, my eyes sweeping over the park expanse from my new vantage point, ankle pain quite forgotten. Tension began to worm its way up my spine as for the first time since arriving, I wasn't distracted from my own thoughts. I knew then that I probably should have refused to come here with Amelia. We could have gone to see a movie downtown or visited the horse ranch nearby, where a friend of mine lived. Instead, I had brought her here. Without much success, I tried to dismiss the unease I felt. This place was yesterday's news. It should have been behind me, and its hold over me should have been broken already. If that was true, however, why did I suddenly feel so very small, looking out over the trees and fields I felt were so desperately familiar? It had been nearly 10 years since I had last set foot among these hills, and yet it was like opening the first page of a book I had read 1,000 times. Well-worn books didn't make you tense up and dread what you might find when you turned the page, however. That was reserved for horror. Alarmed, I tried to think of something, anything, to distract me again, and stop the train of memories before they could collide with my composure. As it turned out, I had become so thoroughly lost in my own recollections that my phone had started to ring at least once without my noticing it. With a frenzied rush for my ringing phone, I fumbled for it in my purse, and answered the call before I could check the caller display.
Hello? Honey, finally!
My mother's voice came to me, jittery with the poor signal.
I've been calling for at least 20 minutes now. Where have you been?
I'm sorry. Unnecessarily, I pulled the phone away to glance at the display, seeing that it was indeed Mother's phone. I didn't have a signal until a minute ago.
Of course.
Mother waved it off metaphorically.
Well, your dad and I are at the theatre now. How are you two doing?
We're fine, I responded in that typically teenage manner guaranteed to raise hackles among most parents.
Are you playing?
Mother, with her laser-like focus, wasn't biting.
Yeah, we're playing hide and seek.
It was technically the truth.
Are you hiding or seeking?
Seeking? I scuffed idly at a dirt-covered stone buried in the hill with a foot.
It doesn't sound like you're seeking very hard.
Oh, please, Mum. Hardly any thought was needed for my answers. No one knows the woods here better than I do. If she can hide from me, she can hide from anyone.
I suppose so.
She laughed.
I guess if you get lost, you can always ask Leitmotif for help.
Ha! I responded at once in a forced laugh. It was almost like a grunt of pain rather than any gesture of amusement. I felt as if Mother had jarred my memory with a brick to the head, sending shards of teeth and thought bouncing across the mossy earth. Leitmotif! Right, Mum. Funny. Ha 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 ha.
I'm almost disappointed that your sister never developed an imaginary friend of her own,
she went on, oblivious to my epiphany.
You were so cute, always coming home with stories about your little adventures.
The tiny factoid that had been prying at my brain ever since I came back to these woods had popped out with the rest of the detritus. Buried under a knot of disappointment and layers of new memories, it had been unearthed with all of its sharp little edges. I was relieved to see that it didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. The pain had dulled. Leaning forward against the railing, I pulled my hair loose to let the wind catch and stir the strands. Taking a look down the hill, the wash where the creek flooded every spring caught my attention. I could almost see again 2 tracks in the mud, one small and sneaker-clad, the other big and many and round. I'm glad you thought my being a complete dip was cute. Real motherly of you. My tone turned a fair bit more bitter than I had intended. I felt small and oddly tender. It was as if she had just pried open a bandage on a sensitive wound.
We all have embarrassing little things we don't like to think about, Daphne.
There was a pause as she lifted the phone from her ear, talking to someone I couldn't hear clearly.
Don't get so wrapped up in being a teenager that you forget to laugh at yourself.
Nah, it's all right. I laughed it off. I just hadn't thought about it in a long time. I'm over it. It's just weird. Really, I barely even think about it anymore. I don't even like the woods. Waste of my time.
I understand. Well, your father and I need to take our seats now. Don't leave Amy alone for too long, all right? You know your sister loves you.
Yeah, I do. Even if she is a little brat. Bye, Mum.
Don't call the kettle black, Daphne. Goodbye.
Giving my phone a glance, I tossed it back into my purse and started down the other side of the hill, wrapped in thought. It had been a long time since I had thought of her. I whistled a little ditty with 5 bars, a rising and falling melody that would have been meaningless to anyone else. To me, in my memories, It was a key turning in a latch. Deep within my mind a vault unlocked, and a breath of air stirred dust off the contents. Turning, I saw a small, dirty girl in overalls burst from the brush, her blonde hair in a ponytail, with a garden trowel in one hand and a pot lid in the other. Little wings had been glued onto her hairband. "Ha!" she cried in triumph. "Behold, foul creature of the woods, I am Daphne, the noble Valkyrie warrior!" Rising from the muck of the stream, covered in pond slime and gooey mud, a terrible creature opened her mouth and announced in a piping, sweet voice, "Foolish human, you have tread too far into my domain, and you shall suffer 1,000 stinging deaths." On all fours she shambled towards the tiny girl who swelled in my imagining, becoming a righteous Norse shield maiden wreathed in power, her trowel now a folded rune blade, and her pot lid a bulwark of steel and hard ebony. The four-legged, shuffling, mud-covered figure began to hum a battle theme, and soon twisted into a slime-covered troll, her forearms lengthened horribly so that she could walk on them as she slavered and snapped her jaws. As vividly as if I were there in the past, the battle scene unfolded before me. If the details were a bit off, I hardly noticed enough to care. Dreams had always been better than the real thing to a girl of that age and temperament. The titanic battle raged across the field, overturning trees and flattening hills, drying rivers and cracking bedrock. "With my strength I smite at you, vile beast!" the Valkyrie thundered, and skewered the she-troll center mass. In truth, of course, the trowel bounced off a mud-covered flank with little noticeable impact, aside from sending crusted gunk flying, but the other girl sold it as if she had received a mortal blow from a mighty blade. She stumbled back on all fours, bellowing in agony. "Oh!" The girl toppled back and forth, prolonging her death scene. "Woe! I am defeated! Slain by a beautiful warrior, cut down before my time, ripped from the pages of history."
"Psst!"
the little blonde girl hissed.
"Vikings didn't have paper then, stupid."
"Never to be remembered except in infamy in song or story," the play troll lamented, slumping against a rock and flopping pitiably. "Oh, for shame! My children will know only of my defeat. Sing them my dirge, noble warrior." The little would-be Valkyrie rolled her eyes as the other began to improvise death lyrics on the spot, and deciding to finish the fell beast before she could die of annoyance, tackled her off the rock and into the nearby stream. Squeals of girlish laughter rang from the trees, startling birds from their nests, as the two struggled in the clear, crisp water. They splashed and dunked one another. They splashed and they giggled. Drenched, they let themselves flop onto the shore, exhausted and happy in that way playing children are when finally spent. The little blonde girl turned to her friend and giggled breathlessly, gasping out, "That was fun!" "Yeah, but next time I get to be the Valkyrie warrior." The other grinned from ear to ear. "A mighty Pegasus!" With that she put her legs under herself and rose, bracing with all four hooves to shake her dark blue coat, sending water and bits of river sand flying every which way. Her long mane and tail flopped wetly and shone a shiny black in the sunlight. The little blonde girl squealed again and shielded her face from the spray. Giggling, she rose and took the beaten hairband from where it lay, sliding it onto the now revealed filly's backside to adorn it with attached wings.
"Sure, but aren't you a unicorn?"
The human girl reached out to poke the horn protruding from her friend's forelock. Navy blue hooves warded her off. Grinning with her expressive face, its features faintly equine in the way a human's was faintly ape, she hopped onto the flat-topped rock and lifted a hoof proudly. "Then I'll have to be a powerful and fabulous alicorn princess." Taking a breath, I shut my eyes. When I opened them, I was alone by the stream bed, the rock and shore bare of my imaginings. My heart pounded in my chest. The doctor had said it would all fade with time. Would that it could fade a little faster. I couldn't think of anything else as I wandered among the trees on the old paths. I certainly didn't think of Mother, or Amelia, or other things not in sight. I didn't think of the latest fashions, or which boys at school were cuter than the others. I didn't think of bands, math homework, shopping, dances, television programs, or any of 100 normal expected teenage preoccupations I had piled between myself and the childish things I had left behind. 1,000 silly, vapid, distracting ideas served to separate the forest and who I was from who I became. As it turned out, this left me quite vulnerable, because without those distractions, every tree and bush in this land with which I was so intimately familiar became a gateway into a forgotten slice of memory. Here a foal and a little girl swung perilously on branches across a stream-cut ravine. There they paddled in a hand and hoof-made canoe down by the deepest part of the river towards the lake. They climbed trees over by the wash, and they caught frogs in the ponds. The girls had first met in the last snow of winter, over by the lightning-blasted pine, 2 young, curious creatures keeping their distance and feeling one another out, frightened a little, but with that bold spirit of reckless adventure that came to define them both.
"What are you?"
they had asked in unison, and then screamed at once in fright at seeing the other could talk, and ran for cover. The filly had been the first to laugh at her own fear, and the girl had followed suit. With my head filling up on flashes of recollection, and my heart thudding with half-remembered feelings, I paused on a ridge lined with stones, one that had the best view of the sky for miles in any direction. There, on one hot summer night, they pitched a tent and told stories around a lantern to frighten one another. I knelt down to peer inside, my eyes penetrating the cloth effortlessly, when, sleepy and giddy, with their bellies full of s'mores and milkshakes, and their heads cottony with a long day's adventuring, the little girl had leaned across the open survival guide she had pillaged from her uncle's army duffel bag, and thrown her arms about her sturdy neck.
"I love you, Light,"
she whispered, her fingers curled tightly in the long mane. "I love you too, Daphne." Leitmotif's forelegs closed around the human girl, squeezing her just as tightly. Daphne, which is to say I, had pulled away then, my face wet.
I'm going away for a week. My family's going on a vacation,"
I had said, stammering over the words. I grit my teeth in the present time. I really had no reason to be crying. I knew I was going to see her again after, but little girls could be so ridiculous sometimes.
"Then it's back to school. I'll come by after school, I promise, just like before."
"I start school like a few days after that. I'll have plenty of time," Light said. Caught up in the mutual emotion, Light sniffed and rubbed her nose, her green eyes huge and shining. "Hey, I know! Why don't we go to your place when you get back?"
I don't know. My mum and dad, I don't think they like you."
I hemmed, but I could see the appeal. Ever since we met, my mother's tolerant laughter on being told of Leitmotif had rankled me. The thought of their faces when I showed up at the door with her in tow to see their faces was priceless. Leitmotif might as well have been reading my mind, her face splitting in a grin. "Come on! You know it'll be great! I want to see your new sister, too! I've never seen a human foal before."
"Baby,"
I had corrected absently, and beamed.
"Yeah, that's perfect! Then I'll get to visit your folks, right?"
"Sure! We'll bring everyone together for a big picnic, and it'll be like every pony is part of a big 2-species family, and we'll be like sisters." We hugged, and the promises had flown back and forth, before we had curled up next to each other and fallen fast asleep. Mother had scolded me so fierce the next morning for staying out after dark that I couldn't help but let it slip. I would show her Light was real. I closed my eyes, banishing the images again, and settled down on the grass with a heavy sigh. The part that came next was the part I really wished I could forget, a part of my life that was going to keep aching no matter how long I refused to look at it. Taking in the late afternoon air and the wilting trees of the park, I realized that I had run long enough. I sat absorbing the beauty of a forest that was surrendering to winter's grasp, and realized that if I didn't, like the trees before me, strip my soul of the dying leaves of the past, I would never overcome the lingering fragments of pain in my heart, circulated with every pump of red sap blood. Bracing myself, I closed my eyes, gathered my resolve, and peeled off the unseen bandages.
"She is real! She is real!"
Little Daphne shouted at her mother. Her face was filled with tears, and her hands were curled into little fists. My parents kept insisting and insisting that leitmotif was just a dream, and I was so angry. I spoke to her. I held her. Why can't you understand? Daphne, please, just stop, Mother shouted over me. We are going home right now if you won't be quiet and listen to me. She didn't stay quiet. We did go home. I never did apologize for ruining our vacation, the last we had taken as a family after Amelia had been born. Add that to my list of things I need to do to get closure today. 3 days home. 3 days staring at the woods, knowing leitmotif wouldn't be there, leaning on my windowsill by the shattered remains of my bulky old-school Game Boy, smashed in a fit of quickly regretted pique. After all, I had said I was going to be gone for a whole week. She wouldn't bother coming back before then. She walked into class and told everyone about leitmotif, and they were all eating out of her hand, the other kids eager to hear about her stories. I stared down at a big wooden desk and a chair with a small, stubborn girl ensconced in it. A patient, kindly face adorned with spectacles sat across from her, his hands folded. She could pick out the typeface on the modest watch his wife had given him as a birthday present, and the round scar in his hand he had received in Vietnam. She came to know him very well over the next few weeks, so I could fill in those sorts of details easily enough. Her big mouth opened on that first day and told him, quite firmly, "Yes, Doctor, leitmotif is a magical unicorn, though she can't do any magic yet, and she doesn't have her special talent yet either, so she isn't sure what sort of magic she can do. And we're best friends, and I'm going to show everyone." She told him as much for 2 weeks. Images folded in my mind. A teary, uncertain face walking along the familiar paths. I could peer down the cliff and see myself now, with Mother and the doctor in tow. "Light!" she called. "Light!" "Let's go and see," he had finally suggested, sensing perhaps that my doubts had reached a turning point. After 2 weeks of him patiently pointing out the holes in my story, of how no one else had ever seen her, in showing me the children's stories of unicorns and fairies I had grown up devouring to show me the basis of my dreams, of using my own damnably intelligent brain against me to show how easy it was for me to make up perfectly rational stories on the most flimsy bases, he felt I could finally make a breakthrough. "Let's go and see, and put it to rest." "Light?" I had tried to call one last time, but it came out as a raspy whisper instead. I stared off into the darkening woods. Put to rest and buried. I lowered my face into my hands with the wind whistling past my ears and through my hair. All my childish things lay around me, all illusions stripped away. I tried to sever them, to let them join the blue sky at the far western horizon which even now had begun to darken into earliest twilight. If only burying someone and moving on were quite that easy. Amelia. I was so bored. I kicked a small rock, watching it bounce down the trail. Hiding had been fun, but I didn't see the point anymore. The sky started to turn red, and Daphne had not yet come crashing through the woods like a big dumb elephant. For the first hour or two, I had actually believed she was going to go through with it this time. I guess that made me dumb too. My book of insects lay open on my bag. The thought of going back to hunting was thrown out immediately, as I had already been collecting bugs for the last hour, and it was getting harder to find new ones in this part of the wood. My journal was full of sketches and notes. There were more than enough to blow my science teacher's socks off, and maybe his shoes as well. That made for yet another thing I liked, that Daphne didn't care enough to pay attention to. She just didn't get me. Leaning against the tree and watching the sky, I chewed my lip thoughtfully. None of my friends had any older siblings, so they weren't any help. How did you explain what it's like to be ignored by your big sister to someone who doesn't even know what it's like to have a big sister to begin with, let alone what it meant when she ignored you every time you tried to show how much you cared, or how much you wanted to spend time with her? Forget about explaining it to Mum or Dad, either. I scrunched up my face and gave my best nasally impression of Mum.
"You just need to try harder, sweetheart. She'll come around. She's a big girl and she wants to do her own thing now and then."
For Dad, I pictured a bullfrog I had seen in a cartoon, and puffed out my cheeks, speaking as deeply as I could.
Mum's right, Pumpkin. Daphne's just trying to be a teenager. There will be a time for you to have fun together.
Idiots!
I shouted to the uncaring sky, startling a few birds, letting the world know how I felt about that.
And I'm not a pumpkin. I hate pumpkins. I'd rather be a kumquat.
That settled it. A girl could only take so much pushing around. I squared my shoulders like a lumberjack getting ready to face off with an ent, and stuffed my textbook into my satchel. Its bookmarks were carefully set in place before my journal went in behind it, tied shut with a big rubber band. Next came my magnifying lens, then my pencils and my crayons, and finally my compass. I snapped the bag's clasps shut and hitched it on.
All right,
I informed the beehive I had hoped to surprise Daphne with.
I'm going to find my sister and make her understand.
When I got back to the place with the benches by the water, I searched around to see if Daphne was just sitting around. Not finding her there, I hiked to the top of the hill, but she wasn't there either. I did find her shoe print on the flat rock at the top, however, so she probably went up here to get a signal so she could talk to her stupid friends. I hopped up on the stone fence and squinted around under the setting sun, looking for...
Aha!
There she was, her head tucked down and her hands in her pockets. I found a nice muddy spot and slid partway down the hill before running the rest of the way.
You traitor!
Daphne's head jerked up, and I almost skidded into an uncontrolled slide on the path in surprise. She'd wiped her makeup off, and her face was all puffy as if she had been crying. Which was impossible, of course, since everyone knew that evil queens had hearts of stone. Squeezing out my courage, I faced her down, as if there weren't several heads between us in height.
How dare you leave me out there?
I wasn't, she began, but I didn't let her continue. I was half afraid she might say something that would make me less angry at her.
Wasn't looking for me at all. You broke your promise. You said you were going to play with me.
I didn't actually promise anything, she said, which was exactly what I wanted to hear.
No, you didn't, and you never do. You're always saying you're going to do things, and then you dump me with the rest of the junk. I waited for hours because I wanted to spend time with you, and you were off talking to your friends and playing with your hair. Amy, I was just on my way... Just now?
It was getting hard to stop talking, like there was this train churning up inside my throat, and I kept on talking, faster and faster.
Just on your way now? Just like always, it's always on your time or not at all. When do I ever get to decide what to do? How long until you just take me out and leave me on the road somewhere so I can go off and be raised by wolves like you've obviously always wanted? If you don't want me around, why don't you just go away and stop jerking me along?
I continued with barely a breath to spare.
You're the stupidest, ugliest, meanest, most hateful sister in the world!
Daphne's eyebrows shot up, and I could see her colour rising. Good.
Well, you're the filthiest, brattiest, most selfish little sister the world has ever known.
The wind picked up, and the leaves began to blow hard across the ground, swirling around us. I gathered my breath and pronounced the most fatal, most unforgivable curse imaginable.
Well, if that's the way you feel, then maybe I don't want a sister.
A branch fell off a ways in the wood, as if to punctuate the severity of those words. Daphne was taken aback, startled, but it only seemed to redouble her anger. She lowered her face to meet mine, while I rose up to meet her on my tiptoes, nearly nose to nose.
Yeah? You wouldn't last 10 minutes without a sister. Oh, yeah?
I snarled back like a mean dog.
Yeah!
She hissed like an angry cat.
Fine!
Fine! I hitched up my satchel, turned, and ran. I didn't cry either. My face just gets wet like that. I'm not sure how far I ran. Daphne probably didn't even care enough to call out to me. Even if she had, I couldn't have heard her. I needed her as much as I needed fire ants in my shoes. Running up and down the hills sapped my energy quicker than I thought it would. Mum always had us stick to the trails when we came out here together. Sheer temper drove me forward through the backwoods until nightfall, and then I finally understood why some folk are afraid of the dark. Dusk was only about half an hour, but it was surprising how fast it got dark after the sun set. Somehow, the path had dwindled from a sneaker-trodden dirt road to a dinky little deer trail, ferns and other forest foliage nipping at my shins. It was already so dark I hadn't noticed until a branch snagged at my bag. Pencil outlines of trunks stood out from the edge of the path, and even those were beginning to fade into the shadows. The canopy was only visible above because it blocked out the stars. Without the moon being high enough to provide some sort of illumination, every tree and rock was cast in near pitch black. Even when I lifted my hand up, I could only tell it was there because it blocked the stars. The cold had me zipping my jacket all the way up and stuffing my hands into my sleeves. I might have shivered a little, but it had absolutely nothing to do with being scared. Any other girl might have been frightened, but not me. It was getting really cold, however, and it would get a lot colder soon. On a long night like this, staying up to watch the stars come out, it was nice to have a thick blanket and a cup of hot cocoa, both things that were disappointingly lacking just then. Determination and bitter feelings wouldn't let me be scared. I absolutely did not need a useless sister to hold me back either. It's not like Daphne knew anything about the forest anyway. All she cared about was her schoolwork and Facebook pages and boring boy bands. She certainly didn't care about me, or anyone real except herself. Jerk.
I'll show her,
I muttered. Taking my satchel off, I kneeled and carefully rummaged over its contents. Mum and Dad weren't getting home until close to midnight, so they wouldn't know what had happened unless Daphne had already called them, which she wouldn't.
I'll get out of here all by myself, and when I do, I'm going to tell her that I'll let Mum and Dad know everything if she doesn't do what I say. I'll be able to get anything I want, and she won't be able to say a thing, or she'll get in huge trouble. Maybe they'll even send her away somewhere. To prison. A prison on the moon would be nice.
It was a little better to hear my own voice while I worked. Not that I was afraid of being alone, or anything like that. Pushing aside my supply of cool mint gum in my satchel, I fumbled at a dark shape and blew a breath out in relief. With a click, the boxy flashlight taken from the garage came to life, forcing me to glance away to blink out the spots. It wasn't a good idea to point one of those near your face when it got that dark. I stuck a stick of gum into my mouth and pointed the flashlight back into the bag, seeing if anything else might be helpful. Out came the survival compass, its lanyard tied around my wrist. I didn't bother checking the temperature meter on the side. I didn't think I'd want to see exactly how cold it actually was. There was also the music player Grandmother had given me for Christmas, but if a bear was going to sneak up on me, I at least wanted to hear it coming early enough to scream before it gobbled me up in 2 bites, which would be really cool at least. Mum told me not to talk like that in front of other kids, but she can be silly like that. Who doesn't think bears are cool? Not seeing anything else of use, I carefully closed my bag up and stood, sweeping the flashlight's beam around. 2 pairs of eyes glowed back at me for a moment, making me jump. At the noise they became vague, blurring flashes, running away as fast as they could.
Okay, Amelia,
I whispered.
All you need to do is get unlost and leave the dark, coyote, or bear-filled woods and get back home. Then it's nothing but ice cream to eat and rubbing it in Daphne's stupid face for months.
I turned my wrist over and held the compass level. With the flashlight, the compass pointed out which direction north was, which meant I needed to turn around to head west to get to town. A quick spin on my heels set my heading, an eagerness to strip Daphne of all her dastardly big sisterly powers spurring me on. The harsh beam of the flashlight cut through the darkness and starkly outlined the brush and small rocks and hard shadows. It swept a long way among the trees, diffusing into a misty haze in places. When I was younger, I might have filled that low fog up with all sorts of things that might have been perfectly happy to gobble up a little girl who wandered from the path. But I was a big girl now, and I was going to get out of this mess all by myself, I hoped. The wind continued to blow, and the trees kept on rustling in the night, unseen but not unheard, as I began walking. Owls had been calling earlier, but they were quiet now. I began to wish I had taken out my music player, because it was starting to become more than a little eerie out here. Even a spooky soundtrack might have been better than nothing. There were other sounds, though. Bushes shifted in the dark, likely more rats and other rodents on the forest floor, and my shoes crunched on the fallen leaves and loose soil. Sweeping the light ahead of me every few steps kept me from falling into unseen holes. With the bed of fallen leaves, it was hard to see anything even with the light, but it was certainly better than going without it. Checking my compass after a while had me biting my lip to keep myself from screaming. I couldn't have gone very far, but I had already started to drift north, which was exactly where I didn't want to go, because the woods only got denser that way. There would be roads and settlements in almost any direction, but how long would it take to get there? And if I was getting turned around, I wouldn't get anywhere. Resetting my course and heading off into the forest again, I wished I had a cell phone of my own. My confidence started to dry up with my throat, and my earlier resolve not to call for help would have vanished instantly if I could have called someone for help, or at least been able to see the time of night or a map. A part of me even wished for Daphne to show up, if only so I could yell at her so that I could feel better, and we could be lost together instead of alone. When I climbed up a small ridge, though, I almost cried out. A light! I could see a light! It hung like a little sun over a trail, its gentle yellow glow beckoning to me like a moth to a porch light. Roots tripped me up twice before I remembered to stop running and check where my feet were landing. It would have been really stupid of me to fall and crack my head open at the final stretch, but I was just so excited to see any sign of civilization. Panting, I slid to a halt, falling over backwards on some loose dirt before the lantern. My braid hung in my face, nearly undone from the poor treatment it had received. The lantern swung slightly in the breeze, its light wavering around me. Looking around, however, I felt a sudden chill. The lantern's pool of light was an island within a sea of shadow and drifting shapes that I couldn't really make out. There weren't any buildings around, judging from the lack of light, not even a little outhouse for park rangers. I forced myself to cheer up, though. A light meant electricity, and it meant people came this way, maybe even at night. Getting lost on a trail would be a lot harder, too. Oh. Right. Getting lost on a trail was how I got into this situation. It all seemed a little strange for all that. The lantern, hanging on a curved post, seemed like one of those old-timey pieces they put up in the colonial part of town. It even flickered like a candle flame instead of a proper electric light, but it could have just been busted. There was more that seemed wrong here than just the light, though. I stared up at the sky, hoping to see the moon or something familiar, but even that seemed wrong. The stars in the sky were no help either. Constellations weren't hard to spot, but only Orion was visible, and it was in the wrong place entirely for this part of the year. Or I think it was in the wrong place. It seemed a little funny itself, for that matter, with some additional stars in places they shouldn't be. But none of that mattered. There was still a light, and it meant that I was in better shape than I had been, smashing through the woods. Turning my compass up, though, I could only stare at the little dial, eyes wide and jaw trembling. The stupid thing said I had been going east. Even as I watched, knuckles white around it, the needle inside wobbled a bit, as if it were unsure whether north was directly ahead or somewhat to the left. It was unbelievable. My trusted navigator broken. I nearly cried right then and there. Nearly. I'm a big girl, and I don't cry over stupid things like that, no matter how badly the night was going. Wiping my face, because it was cold, not because I was crying, I spun around and started down the trail, the cone of my flashlight watching the path ahead. It curved a bit, but the going was a lot faster now without having to worry so much about branches or roots or holes to trip over. There were little horseshoe-shaped indentations in the trail, too, so it was probably a horse trail. The family of one of Daphne's friends had a horse ranch outside of town. Hopefully, it was one of theirs. Maybe I'd get to ride home on a pony. With any luck, a sign would present itself along the roadside soon. There was neither a sign nor a pony, however. It certainly wasn't a ranch, either. I stopped along the trail, staring ahead with a smile creeping across my face. There was light, and not just a single light, but what must have been a whole house of light. I would have run if my feet weren't so tired, but I still skipped for joy. I froze. The pond and the clearing it was in had no house, and it lacked anything like lampposts or light fixtures, or even lanterns or candles. Instead, there was a full moon through the trees, which I knew was just last week. I had memorized all of the full moons for the next 2 years in case of werewolf attacks. Besides, the moon wasn't supposed to be quite that big or bright. Either way, it was almost as bright as daylight or nighttime in a movie. As I stared what I thought to have been a very shiny rock, fluttered. The biggest beetle I had ever seen or imagined popped out of the ground, its back a snowy luminescent white. It trundled along with its spindly egg-white legs and searched along the ground, prying up little morsels of green. Before anything could be decided about it, however, something else moved. That something else was so fast that I almost didn't see it at all before it struck. Long and sleek with smooth black fur, it had the look of a great cat, with alert triangular ears and a swishing tufted tail. It pounced from the cover of the tall grass and slapped its paws over the great white beetle, pinning it to the ground. The monster's teeth gleamed with their own unearthly light beneath the moon, and its eyes seemed bright with blue fire. A gasp escaped my lips, and a twig snapped underfoot for good measure. The beast's head jerked up, but I had already leapt and grabbed a limb of the tree beside me, hauling myself up and onto it before the thing could cross the clearing to look. My flashlight had fallen to the ground, for it was too big to stuff into any of my pockets. In its spotlight, the monster was illumined sharply, a powerful shadow. The beetle lay forgotten on the mossy clearing while the cat thing paused, looking up at me as I climbed up another limb to get even further away from it. It lifted a paw and turned my flashlight over. There was a low hiss as the beam caught it nearly full in the face. I could see that its claws, fully extended, were at least as big as a lion's, if not more so, and gleamed with the same witch-light its teeth did. Even as it smoothed its fur and considered me for its next meal, though, I couldn't help but be fascinated. I had seen lions and cougars and tigers at the zoo before, but they had never seemed as dangerously alive as this one, nor as beautiful. It had that same fluid feline grace and predatory posture as it circled below, and I hoped it couldn't climb trees if it decided to. There was no stopping it if it did.
"Not afraid, bear?"
it asked, and I just about let go out of shock. Its voice was as smooth and deadly and alien as the creature itself was, sounding like fine sand. There was an odd little click with the words, like some insects made, but I wasn't really thinking about insects anymore.
"Oh,"
it breathed.
"You'll be very surprised if that gets you riled."
You can talk!
I realized how stupid it sounded immediately, of course, but sometimes those things just slip out. Despite my fascination, instinct had me wrapping my arms and legs tightly around the branch. Shifting my body around slipped my unkempt braid from my back, however, dangling it low. Too low for my liking. The thing might spring up and hook me with its claws that way.
Always the first thing they say to the Morwen. Why not declare more important things, Baron? One might suggest, I am poisonous, or are you full?
But I am poisonous!
I said at once, pouncing on the opportunity like it had on the beetle. I opened my mouth and blew a neon green bubble from the gum I had been chewing all night. The Morwen, or whatever it was, danced back another pace, its blue eyes wide and hot as the bubble popped, and I sucked it back in again. I didn't let relief show, keeping my gaze firmly on the creature. It circled back, slowly and more cautiously, the tufts on its back rippling.
"Oh, she is crafty,"
it hissed.
"Did she dose herself, or is it natural to her kind? One must find out."
I wasn't sure if it was speaking to me, or if the thing simply wanted me to hear its thoughts, but I didn't let it unnerve me. Dad's voice echoed faintly in my head, telling me not to show fear in front of those who wanted to hurt me.
Yeah, too bad,
I told it.
Why don't you go eat that pretty beetle instead? I don't want to get gobbled and you don't want your belly to melt.
By the by, the Morwen is quite content to interrogate the town yet. None would dare touch its prey before it was done.
Well, I'm not alone. I've got a big sister coming, and she's the biggest, meanest, ugliest green ogress you ever did see. She'll pop your head right off if you don't leave me alone.
I knew it was a bluff, but there weren't a lot of choices open to me. The monster was a weird mixture of scary and lovely pacing down there. It was kind of strange, but I remembered how much I really wanted a cat just then.
The wee bairn is full of things to say, but not so full of things done. You remind one of...
It paused, trailing off. Those fiery eyes looked off into the distance, the Morwen seeming to consider something, its hot breath steaming in the night air.
Yes,
it hissed, more excited now as it rotated back to face me.
You are the girl, the one who walks the woods.
Yes,
I answered immediately. It was a very important lesson I had learned from Mum's favourite movie of all time, Ghostbusters.
Yes. The yellow hair, the algae green eyes, the earthen smell.
I do not smell!
I protested, although the rest of the description was definitely me, and couldn't possibly be anyone else.
Forgive the Morwen's rudeness and threats, bairn,
it said, its tone immediately shifting. Its claws retracted and it sat down, lifting a bare black paw in gesture of welcome.
You have been expected.
It wouldn't surprise anyone to hear that I was suspicious. The spider was always welcoming when it thought the fly would come willingly into its home. Still, it could have attacked me at any time. If the Morwen was being truthful, maybe I wouldn't be stuck up here all night, or until it decided I was worth trying anyway. Besides, there was a girl who looked just like me who was being expected by weird monsters in the woods at night. How could I pass up on that sort of mystery?
Expected? By who?
I asked, intrigued.
Or what?
Why, the Morwen, and others as well.
It explained.
A fabulous kingdom awaits you, of song and magic. A land populated by griffins and dragons and unicorns and pegasi, and more.
Unicorns? Dragons?
I gaped.
Surely, only a fraction of what awaits.
Chewing on my lip, I looked down at the Morwen, weighing my options. Stay up in a tree until morning and hope the Morwen didn't manage to eat me anyway, then try to find my way home, or risk the jaws of a giant demonic cat now so I could have a chance to visit a magical fairy tale land. Sold. Daphne. It took me all of about 10 minutes to realize what an idiot I had been. Not to mention a jerk, evil sister, or whatever other terms applied right then. Even if she had known her way around, letting a little girl wander around the forest when it was about to get very dark very quickly was about as irresponsible as someone could get. "Amy!" I shouted, for all that I knew it was pointless. Sulking by the stream had let the dusk go from red to a deep navy blue across half the sky, and for a healthy girl to run very far indeed. Twilight stars sparkled in cold mockery of my belated concern. With visions of a golden-haired figure lying broken and bleeding in a ditch spurring me forward, I ran the way she had gone. All my earlier anger was melting away now, as if the day's emotional roller coaster hadn't been harrowing enough. When I found her, I was going to grab her and shout at her and ask her why she had been so stupid, and then I probably wouldn't wait for her answer, and hug her and take her home and give her all the ice cream she wanted. I kept running, and my legs began to burn before long, dashing over the trails headed deeper into the woods. Visibility steadily declined as the shadows of the trees, already merged into one vast swamp of darkness, deepened. Catching my foot on something unseen ended my mad dash, pitching me face first into the earth. Once the dust had settled, I hobbled to my feet, massaging my face and brushing it clear of leaves and dirt. Ow! Panting heavily, I stared around at the dark forest, which refused stubbornly to yield its secrets to me. "Amy!
Amelia!" I shouted. It's Daphne!"
My voice echoed over the valleys. I waited. Nothing. There was no point in charging ahead without at least thinking where Amelia might have gone. If she left the trails, it would be very easy for her to get irrevocably lost among the trees. Only the most dedicated hikers and the park managers themselves knew the land better than me, but one of the first things I learned was not to go wandering off in the dark. If Amelia had taken this direction and kept to the trails, it would take her deeper into the woods, and the nearest habitation in that direction wasn't for miles. It all seemed impossibly bleak. If there was any hope of finding Amelia, It lay in one place. As a young girl, every trip out into the woods had a specific meeting spot in mind. That last time, with Mother and my therapist at my side, an hour had come and gone with no sign of my imaginary unicorn friend. The meeting site wasn't visible from here, not in the dark, but the towering old oak would still be there, unchanged by a mere 8 years. There was a good chance Amelia was there. If she had come this way, she would meet up with the river before long, and that would lead her straight to the oak. More importantly, it was the only place with shelter for miles around, and hikers often used it as such. Assuming Amelia had run out of bluster by now, she'd be there. So resolved, I pulled myself together and began hiking again, picking a steady pace and ignoring my pain and discomfort. The moon was too low, the earth was pitch black, and even with my cell phone lit and pointed toward the ground, the trek wasn't without its trips, falls, scrapes, and bruises. In spite of that, I was rapidly eating up distance now that there was a destination in mind. The area around here was more familiar than I liked to admit. Occasional glances at my phone's screen, which had a few new chips and scratches from my many tumbles, failed to change the lack of a signal, as if the whole of Western civilization had been left behind. A loon called with its eerie scream as I found myself on that familiar ground again. The grassy knoll, the cavern-like roots, a star-filled sky hanging over a rugged landscape. Even the lights of the surrounding towns could be seen from up here, staining the horizon with their night lives. They spread across so much more of the skyline now, yet another reminder of how things had changed. The wind bit at me, stealing away what little warmth my body held from the run up the trail. Rubbing my arms did nothing to stave off the shivering as I looked around. Nearly the entire park lay before me. From here it might be possible to catch a glimpse of her flashlight if she turned it this way. I scanned the darkness for the faintest pinprick. There! A flash of blue! I stared for a minute, conflicted. That was where she had come from. There wasn't time to allow myself to be distracted by such thoughts, though. Only one thing mattered right now. My little sister. I ran. My breathing heaved, and I tried my best to quiet it. A younger Daphne might have been able to deal with this sort of exertion, but a few years of sedentary living could do a number on someone's energy. By the surrounding scene, however, it seemed that calm and quiet was going to be important. I lifted my head carefully over the log I was hiding behind, and stared down at the grove, which rose on the side of the hill by one of the deepest parts of the river ravine. 3 short men were down there, hand-held lanterns arrayed about them. Each was wearing a strange overcoat and had a weird look about them, but I knew thugs when I saw them, all hair and muscle and bad teeth. Seeing the lantern light had nearly given me a heart attack, and trying to approach through the dense brush on the top of the hill had been liable to kill me as well, but I was glad I had. Sweaty, dirty, bruised, and maybe a little bloody, I crouched down among the leaves and covered my hair with the hood of my jacket to keep anything shiny from showing. It was just like the games I used to play in the woods, only now it was all too real. One of the brutes was rubbing a long, knotted stick in a nervous fashion, watching the approaches to the grove warily. Another, digging at a tin of something dark and fragrant, grunted, "Morgwin coming?" "Yep." "Shoulda got the girl." "Same as last 6 times you asked," the one with the stick said, his voice even more guttural and unpleasant than the other. "Only asked 4 times," the one with the bean can complained, stuffing a handful into his mouth. "That's only 'cause you can't count past the 4th finger on your right hand. It never occurred to you to use the other one, even though it got 5. "Shut your mouth! Just 'cause the big guy gave you the shiny stick don't mean nothing," Bean Can growled and glowered at his companion. "It means there's 1 set of brains between us, and I got a full share." The one with the bean can frowned at that. The hitherto silent one spoke up. "Wait, don't that leave us with... Wait, no, you gotta carry the 2... The stick came down with a snap. I swear there was even a flash of harsh light, like he'd just struck a magnesium rod against the rock, and I had to restrain myself hard from jumping. Now where the hell did that come from? "Quiet," he hissed. "The Morgwin's coming, saw its devil blue eyes just now, and if you turn your back on it, I'll make it think you're weak. So help me Discord, I won't lift a bloody finger to save you." They all rose up, and the other 2 even lifted what looked like big, ugly woodsman's axes. All 3 stood in tense silence. All three of them seemed to be genuinely wary, even afraid. The wind stilled. If it was hard to keep from crying out before, it became nearly impossible when my sister strolled into the glade. It was even worse when I saw the thing she was walking at the heels of. Devil blue eyes, like two bright stars burning in the dark beyond the circle of the lanterns. I hardly had time to react when the man with the stick lifted it into the air, and at once lights burst from its tip, filling the air with their magnesium glow and casting a light as bright as day. They hovered and spun like hissing comets. My heart raced, and I felt every tendon in my body tense, as if seized by electricity. I was transfixed by those lights. I knew it. I knew it was real all along. Not 2 hours ago I had told myself that I had buried all of my hopes and dreams in Leitmotif herself, and here were all three being suddenly and violently unearthed. A monster cat and a magic wand, right in front of my eyes. Weeks of being told I was fooling myself. Months of being told magic isn't real. Years of saying I didn't care, that I didn't want to think about it. Those choices had led me to put away all the childish things in my past, so I could get on with my life. All of it could go straight to hell. "I knew it!" I shouted, springing up into the air with all the joy I had bridled deep inside me, hidden away in the dark recesses of my soul so I wouldn't feel it ever again. 5 sets of eyes turned towards me in the sun-bright clearing. Oh, damn it! No help for it now. I reached down, grabbed the branch I had left for just this purpose, and heaved. My purse, with all of its useful contents emptied into my pockets, came flying out of the dark beside me, and with my scarf unraveling from the tear I had made, showered all three of the ugly men with heavy, fist-sized rocks, and a great deal of dry sand from the riverbank. The one with the bean can was brained on the side of the head and went down with a bloody stain, catching himself on one hand, while the other two were surprised and blinded. "Run, Amelia!" I screamed at the top of my lungs, even as I gathered myself. It was totally insane, but I had no other choice now. I had to protect her. I had to. I put my feet on the log, and leapt like a lioness at the man holding the magic wand, or at least a very angry house cat. Even though I probably had half his mass, I collided with him while he was still rubbing sand out of his eyes and with all the force inertia and gravity could lend me. The impact knocked the wind out of us, but I recovered first. He tried to hit me with the knotted stick in apparent instinct, and I grabbed it in both hands. A great gout of white flame shot from the tip, and it grew hot in my hands. The other two brutes dove for cover as we began to struggle over the wand. He with the greater strength and impaired vision, I with the better vantage on the wand, and a fierceness born out of righteous fury. With every twist, the wand shot off again. One beam hit a nearby tree, and it burst apart immediately, logs of sawn lumber raining down like a lumberjack's ill-timed wish. I heaved, turning the wand again, and it swept sparkling light over a pile of leaves. A great shower of white birds flooded into the air as the pile changed, shrieking and clawing, washing up into the dark like the foamy spray of an ocean wave. The others didn't dare come closer, not with the wand firing off this way and that. I swore I heard an elephant's trumpet, and one of the rocks that had tumbled by the campsite bucked and leapt like a horse. Pine cones burst into smokeless fire, and the other two brutes yelped and rolled to keep their clothes from alighting. I shrieked and dug my foot into the struggling man's face, and balls of blue plasma bubbled out of the wand to land around us, swallowing holes in the earth with barely a whisper of effort. The one with the bloodied head shrieked in a high-pitched voice and fell back from one of those globes, losing his heavy leather bag. Every blast of the wand was like a gunshot going off. I wouldn't have been surprised to see blisters rising on my palms from the heat if I could see more than faint flashes. The white, magnesium-bright blasts left me nearly blinded with spots, and each burst of sound left my ears ringing. My heart stopped as a flash went off near my face, with each individual spark showering off the tip and leaving a bright trail in my vision. Where it hit I had no idea, so consumed by the struggle and violence of the magic that nothing was distinct anymore. With all the pandemonium, I believed for a moment that I might actually get through this in one piece, if I were quick enough. It was like the games Light and I had made up together, fighting against imaginary thugs of our own making. I wished I could see where my sister or the cat had gone, but I had to keep all of my attention focused on the task ahead of me. Maybe, if I could get the wand away, I might have a chance. If I could only get my foot under him. I had to. When my weight shifted, my foot slipped in the mud, throwing me off balance. The wand slackened in my grip, and for one horrible instant, I knew I had made a terrible mistake. With a great heave and grunt of effort, the man under me shifted, throwing his weight behind his shove and pushing me back. With the wand in a death grip, it almost came back with me. Instead, its tip pointed directly at my chest. Alabaster light filled my world. I felt myself drifting back, softly, as if on a bed of clouds, watching the trees float by me through a haze of pearl fog. I was falling, gently now. Down. Down I went. With nary a splash, I slid into the dark water. The surface closed over my body, and in my mind, a dark river too swallowed me whole into its depths.